What this rookie nurse did in 2 hours left the head surgeon speechless. And if you have ever watched the world fall apart while everyone waits for permission to act, this story is going to hit you hard. Past midnight in Norfolk, the ER feels like a ship taking water. Rain drums the glass doors. Monitors argue in shrill tones. 5 crash victims arrive, back-to-back, blood on the floor. Glass in their hair residence frozen between protocol and fear. And near the wall stands the newest nurse on the schedule, hands folded, eyes counting breaths like she is timing an explosion. They tell her not to touch a thing until the surgeon gets there. 2 hours later, he storms in and stops cold because no one should still be alive. Stay with me and watch how she bought time when time was the only medicine left. Like this video and comment where you are watching from. Stay with me and watch how she bought time when time was the only medicine left. That night did not begin with heroics or speeches. It began the way so many nights begin in Norfolk, with fluorescent lights that made everyone look a little tired, even when they were trying to act awake, and with the soft, relentless hum of machines that never cared what shift you were on. Tidewater Regional Medical Center sat close enough to the water that the air carried salt even in the parking deck. The rain had been coming in sideways since sundown, turning the city into a smear of reflections. Inside, the emergency department ran on old coffee-battered routines, and the kind of dark humor people only use when they cannot afford to feel everything at once. The triage board glowed above the charge desk names stacked into columns like a list of unfinished prayers. A toddler with a fever, a construction worker who had crushed a finger, a woman who could not catch her breath but kept insisting she was fine, the usual. The kind of usual that never stayed usual for long. Tessa Rowe stood under the board with a clipboard pressed to her chest, eyes narrowed at the staffing grid. She had the posture of someone who had learned to hold a room together without asking permission. Her scrubs were clean, but her shoes carried the scuff marks of too many nights spent moving fast. She counted bodies on her fingers, then counted again, like the numbers might change if she stared hard enough. "We are down 2 nurses," she said, not to anyone in particular, but loud enough that the desk heard it. "And a tech, again." A unit clerk typed without looking up. They said someone was floating down. Tessa's mouth flattened. They always say that. A resident leaned against the counter and tried to smile. Dr. Ethan Briggs had the kind of confidence that came from being smart and untested. His hair was still perfectly in place, his badge clipped at a straight angle, his voice practiced in the tone of someone who planned to be in charge someday. "We've handled worse," he said. Tessa turned her head slowly. "We've survived worse. That is not the same thing." Briggs opened his mouth, then closed it, deciding not to fight a nurse who had more night shifts in her bones than he had years in medicine. He checked his phone anyway, like authority might be hiding in a notification. Across the hall, one of the trauma bays sat, half-stocked, the supply cart stripped down to essentials that were not really essentials. A roll of gauze, 2 pressure dressings, a single airway kit sealed in plastic, the kind of inventory that could disappear in 1 bad hour. A hospital aide pushed a mop bucket past the nurse's station and paused when an alarm chirped, listening for a second to make sure it was not the sound that meant sprint. When it quieted, he kept moving. At the far end of the department, a door opened and closed, and a new badge flashed under the lights. Maya Kincaid stepped into the noise like she belonged there and like she had no interest in proving it. She was new enough that her scrubs still held the crisp fold lines from packaging. Her shoes were plain, no bright colors, no little charms, practical. Her hair was pulled back tight, not for style, for function. She carried no coffee, no energy drink, no nervous chatter. Tessa glanced up from her clipboard. "You are the new one." Maya stopped at the desk. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am," Tessa said. "It makes me feel like I should be yelling at someone." Maya's mouth moved like it almost remembered how to smile. "Yes." Tessa looked her over, the way people in the ER learn to look fast and thorough, picking up details without admitting it. You ever worked nights before? Yes. Tessa waited for more. Maya did not offer it. Briggs pushed off the counter and stepped into the space like he was claiming it. Kincaid. Right, I saw your name on the board. New grad. Maya met his eyes. Her gaze was steady, neither challenging nor deferential. New to this hospital. Briggs took that as whatever he wanted it to mean. Just stay close to your preceptor. Watch. Don't improvise. We do things a certain way here. Maya nodded once. Tessa noticed Briggs did not introduce himself as a resident. He did not say welcome. He said rules. She had seen that impulse before in young doctors, the need to tighten control when the room threatened to overwhelm them. Tessa tapped her clipboard against the desk. Maya, you're with me until your preceptor comes back from break. You see something, you tell me. You don't see something, you still tell me. We don't do silent suffering in my department. Maya's eyes flicked briefly across the nurses' station, the hall, the doors, the trauma bays. A quick scan. A quiet inventory. Then she said, understood. It should have been ordinary, a new nurse being absorbed into the machine. But something about the way she watched made it feel different, like the room was being measured and not merely observed. The overhead speaker crackled and announced a respiratory consult. The waiting room buzzed. A patient coughed hard enough to draw attention. Someone argued with security about visiting hours. The ER did what it always did. It pressed forward. Dr. Nolan Mercer was supposed to be in it, moving through the chaos like the central gear that made everything else turn. He was the trauma chief, the attending who carried the weight of every high-risk decision in a way that made the rest of the staff breathe easier. Not because he was a savior, because he was reliable. He showed up, he made calls, he did not freeze. Tonight, he was not there. His name sat at the top of the on-call board like a promise that had not arrived yet. The residents referenced him constantly as if invoking him would summon him through the doors. Mercer's on his way, Briggs said to a nurse who asked about a procedure order. He texted he's coming, Briggs said again louder when a tech asked where the attending was. Tessa did not answer. She had already called him once. She knew the sound of a man trapped by circumstances he could not cut open. Mercer was in his car on the far side of the city staring at taillights that had turned the highway into a red vein. The rain made the windshield a blur. Wipers thumped with steady impatience. He kept his hands at 10 and 2 like discipline could move traffic. His phone lit up with Tessa's name. He answered immediately. Row. We're thin, Tessa said. How far out are you? Mercer glanced at the glowing brake lights ahead. 10 minutes. Maybe. Tessa made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Try 5. Mercer's jaw tightened. What's coming? Nothing yet, she said, and he heard the superstition in it. In an ER, you did not say quiet. You did not say nothing. You waited for the doors to prove you wrong. Mercer tapped the steering wheel once, then twice, like he could suture time. I'm moving as fast as I can. I know, Tessa said. Just don't die on the way. That paperwork is a nightmare. He would have smiled, but he did not. He stared at the brake lights and felt the weight of being absent. He thought about the rules that had grown thicker in the hospital over the past year, the way risk management had begun to shape medicine into paperwork first and care second. He thought about Celia Vance and her polished voice, her phrases about exposure and liability. He thought about the way residents hesitated, now terrified of making a decision that would be reviewed later by people who had never heard a monitor scream. He ended the call and tried to inch forward. Inside Tidewater Regional, the dead hour leaned over the department like a lid. The clocks crept. The waiting room chairs filled and emptied and filled again. A man complained about wait times until he saw a stretcher go past with blood on the sheet and suddenly found patience. A mother rocked a child who was too tired to cry. A nurse swiped her badge at a supply room door and cursed when it took 3 tries. Maya moved where Tessa pointed. She checked vital signs. She documented. She listened. She spoke when spoken to, nothing more. She was not shy. She was controlled. There was a difference, and people in the ER could sense it even if they could not name it. At one point, a patient in Bay 7 started to panic, oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath. The woman's eyes were wide wet. She grabbed at her own gown like it was suffocating her. "I can't breathe," she gasped. Tessa stepped in with a practiced voice. "Look at me. Breathe with me. In, out." Maya stood at the foot of the bed and watched the rise and fall of the woman's chest. Her lips moved silently, counting. 1, 2, 3. She adjusted the woman's head angle with 2 fingers, not dramatic, just enough. The woman's breathing eased a fraction. Tessa noticed, filed it away, and kept moving. Briggs noticed too, but he noticed it with irritation, like the new nurse had stolen a moment that belonged to him. "Don't do that without telling someone," he said as he walked past. Maya did not argue, noted. Briggs stopped. "Excuse me." Maya looked at him. "I heard you." He wanted a reaction. He wanted apology or defiance. He got neither. That unsettled him more than either would have. He walked away, shoulders rigid. Tessa watched him go and sighed through her nose. Then she leaned closer to Maya without making it obvious. "Some doctors need to feel like the room belongs to them," she murmured. "Just let him have his illusions until he earns something real." Maya's eyes stayed on the hallway. Understood. At 12:58 a.m., the radio at the charge desk crackled with a tone that made the entire staff lift their heads. The dispatcher's voice came through, thin and distorted. "Incoming trauma. Multiple vehicle collision, possible pileup. Stand by." Tessa's spine straightened. She looked at the board. Looked at the staffing grid. Looked at the empty space where Mercer should have been. She picked up the phone and called the operator. Page Mercer again. Trauma alert. Briggs stepped closer, suddenly awake in a way he had not been 5 minutes ago. "How many?" The radio answered before Tessa did. "Multiple patients," the dispatcher said. "At least 5. Paramedics reporting ejections. Unstable vitals. ETA 6 minutes. 6 minutes might as well have been 6 seconds. Tessa's voice cut through the department. "Clear trauma 1. Clear trauma 2. Overflow in bays 4 and 5. Someone get blood on standby. Someone find me a tech who can breathe." A unit clerk started calling names. Nurses moved. A respiratory therapist appeared like a summoned spirit. Briggs lifted his chin. "We wait for Mercer." Tessa turned on him. "Mercer is not here." Briggs's eyes flashed. "Protocol says trauma attending must authorize massive transfusion in certain interventions." Tessa took one step closer, close enough that he could smell coffee on her breath. "Protocol also says we keep people alive. We are going to do both if you can manage to be useful." Briggs swallowed hard. He looked around at the staff moving with speed and purpose, and he felt control slipping. That feeling made him double down. He spotted Maya near the supply cart, hand steady, gaze sharp. "You," he said, pointing. "Kincaid, do not touch anything unless you are directed. You hear me?" Maya looked at him. The ER lights reflected in her eyes like small cold stars. "Yes, doctor," she said. Her tone gave him nothing, but her eyes did not lower. The automatic doors at the front of the department shuddered, as if the building itself had braced. A gust of rain blew inside, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and exhaust. Sirens rose, then cut off abruptly outside. For a heartbeat, the ER held its breath. Then the doors slid open again, harder this time, and the first gurney hit the threshold with paramedics shouting over the alarms. Their gloves slick, their uniforms dark with rain, and the night changed from routine to triage in a single violent motion. The first gurney hit the threshold with a sound that felt like metal striking bone, and the ER surged forward as if the building itself had been commanded. Male. Mid-20s, unrestrained driver. The lead paramedic shouted, rainwater dripping from his hair onto the sheet. Found against the guardrail. Decreased breath sounds left side. Pressure 80 systolic dropping. Behind him came the second gurney, then the third, Then 2 more, stacked so tight the automatic doors never fully closed. The night poured in with them. Diesel, wet asphalt, the sharp electric smell of adrenaline. Tessa's voice cut through it. Trauma 1 driver, Trauma 2 second gurney, Bay 4, Bay 5 overflow, moo. Residents moved like they had been waiting all night for a war to justify their anxiety. A tech grabbed a portable monitor and nearly tripped over an IV pole. Someone called for respiratory. Someone else called for blood. The air filled with overlapping requests that had no time to form into a plan. Ethan Briggs stepped into the center of it, trying to become the axis. We do not activate massive transfusion without Mercer. Tessa did not look at him. She slapped a pair of gloves on and leaned over the first patient's chest. We do what keeps him alive until Mercer gets here. The patient on the first gurney tried to inhale and failed halfway. His lips were gray. His eyes rolled toward Tessa like he wanted to speak, but did not have the oxygen to form words. Blood slicked his hairline, mixing with rain. Tessa glanced at the monitor. The numbers blinked like they were apologizing. She didn't need the numbers, she could see it. 2 large bore IVs, she said. Now. A nurse moved in. A resident fumbled for a tourniquet. Near the far wall, Maya stood where she had been told to stand, hands folded. She looked still, almost absent, but her eyes were everywhere. They tracked the first patient's chest, the slight lift on the right, and the stubborn refusal on the left. They flicked to the second gurney, where a man was talking too much for someone who had been in a crash. They flicked to the third patient's hands, pale fingers twitching as if trying to hold on to consciousness. They flicked to the paramedic's face, the exhausted fear behind professionalism. Maya's lips moved silently, counting breaths like she was timing a fuse. "Get out of the doorway!" Briggs barked at a family member who had wandered too close, then turned and saw Maya. "Kincaid," he snapped. "Do not touch anything. Stay back." Maya met his eyes for a beat. "Yes, doctor." She stayed back. She did not relax. The driver's monitor chirped, then screamed a steady warning tone. Tessa felt for a pulse and found a ghost of one. "He's losing it." A resident spoke too fast. "We need chest decompression, but without an attending, I can't." The patient's eyes widened. His mouth opened. No sound came out. Then his body went slack. The monitor's pattern flattened in a way that turned everyone's blood cold. For half a heartbeat, the bay froze. Not because they didn't know what to do, because too many hands had been trained to wait for permission. Maya did not wait. "Crash cart," she said, and her voice was not loud. It was certain. Tessa's head snapped toward her. So did Briggs's. "What did you say?" Briggs demanded. Maya was already at the bedside. Her fingers found the absence of a pulse with the economy of someone who had done it before in places where no one brought a cart. She looked at the resident standing uselessly at the foot of the bed. "Start compressions or move," she said. The resident blinked like he'd been slapped awake. His hands went to the patient's sternum. His first push was too shallow. Maya's hand closed around his wrist, firm, corrective. "Deeper," she said. "Keep the rhythm." A tech arrived with the crash cart and nearly slammed it into the bed. Tessa ripped open a drawer, grabbed pads, slapped them onto the patient's chest. "Charging," Tessa said. Briggs stepped forward, outraged, trying to reclaim authority. "Stop! You can't!" Maya didn't look at him. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the patient's face. She looked at the hands doing compressions and adjusted their placement by a fraction of an inch. "Again," she said. The room started moving again, pulled into motion by the gravitational force of competence. Someone squeezed the bag valve mask. Someone called out time. Someone drew up meds with shaking hands that steadied when Maya's voice stayed flat. Tessa glanced at Maya's face and felt a flicker of something she didn't like naming. Recognition. Not of who Maya was, but of what she was. A person who did not freeze. The defibrillator beeped. Tessa pressed the button. The patient's body jumped, then settled. The next beat on the monitor was small and ugly, but it was there. A pulse returned under Tessa's fingertips, weak but real. The bay exhaled. Not relief. just the awareness that they had been permitted to keep fighting. No one thanked Maya. No one even said her name. They moved on because the night did not care about gratitude. The second patient rolled into Trauma 2 still talking, his face smeared with blood that wasn't his own. He had that strange brightness in his eyes that sometimes showed up in people who didn't understand they were close to dying. He tried to joke with the paramedics. "You guys should really work on your driving." One of the paramedics didn't laugh. A seatbelt would have helped. The patient grinned anyway, then winced, a sharp breath catching in his throat. He tried to hide it by turning it into a cough. A resident looked at his vitals and relaxed too early. "He's stable. We can bump him lower. Trauma 1 needs everything." Maya stood at the edge of the bay, still as a shadow, watching his chest rise and fall. It wasn't the numbers that drew her attention. It was the way his ribs moved. The asymmetry subtle enough that a tired brain could call it normal. She watched him laugh again. The laugh shortened. His breath went shallow. His shoulder tightened like he was guarding pain he couldn't admit. Maya leaned toward Tessa, voice low enough to be private. "Don't lay him flat." Tessa's eyes flicked to her. "Why?" "Because he's lying," Maya said. "His body is pretending." Tessa looked again, harder this time. She saw it. A slight tugging at the base of the neck. The kind of effort that didn't belong in a man who was joking. Tessa turned to the nurse by the bed. "Keep him upright. Watch his breathing. Call respiratory now." Briggs heard and stepped in, offended. "We are not changing positioning on a gut feeling." Maya's gaze stayed on the patient, not on Briggs. "It's not a feeling." Briggs's voice sharpened. "Who asked you?" Maya finally looked at him. There was no attitude in her eyes, only a kind of calm that made his anger look childish. "I'm telling you," she said. Briggs flushed. "Stay in your lane." Maya nodded once as if he had given an order about linens. Then she went back to watching the patient like he was a clock she was reading. 10 minutes later, the numbers betrayed the lie. Oxygen saturation dropped fast, not gradual like a stone falling through black water. The patient's grin vanished. His hand flew to his chest. Panic hit him in a wave. "I can't," he gasped. "I can't breathe." The resident reached for the monitor like touching it could fix it. "What's happening?" Tessa was already moving, and because Maya had named the collapse before it arrived, the room was ready when it came. Respiratory pushed in with equipment. A nurse raised the bed. The patient's chest strained. Maya spoke again, quiet but direct. "His left side isn't moving." The resident stared. "How do you know?" Maya didn't answer the question. She pointed. 2 fingers precise. "Look." The resident looked, really looked, and saw what he should have seen 10 minutes ago. They moved. Oxygen. Assessment. A needle opened a trapped space. Air hissed out with a sound like a confession. The patient's eyes went wide, then softened as he pulled in his first full breath since arriving. Tessa didn't look at Maya with gratitude. She looked at her with a new wariness, because nobody taught rookies to see that fast. The third gurney arrived before anyone could finish cleaning their gloves. Female, late 30s, a paramedic shouted. "Ejected, pelvis unstable, blood loss significant. We lost pressure twice en route." The woman's skin had that waxy pallor that made the living look almost finished. She was conscious enough to moan, but not enough to form words. A resident started reciting protocol like a prayer. Pelvic binder, large bore, IVS transfusion, fast scan. Briggs cut in. "Hold transfusion until Mercer." Tessa snapped her head toward him. "Stop saying that." Briggs's jaw tightened. "It matters. It matters if she dies while you wait," Tessa said. The supply cart at the bay was missing what it should have had. Someone had stocked it wrong. A common error, a fatal one. Tessa reached for a pelvic binder and found empty space. "Where is it?" she hissed. A nurse opened a drawer, then another. Nothing. For a half-second, the room teetered toward panic again. Maya moved to the supply cabinet without being told. She did not run. She walked fast, purposeful, like she already knew where the missing things were hiding. She yanked open a shelf. Found 2 binders sealed in plastic. checked the seals with her thumb, tossed one to a tech without looking, grabbed hemostatic gauze, grabbed pressure dressings, grabbed a second set of gloves because she knew hands would tear through the first. She returned to the bay as if she had mapped the department in her head the moment she arrived. Briggs saw her and sneered through exhaustion. "You don't have to play hero." Maya didn't glance at him. "I'm not." Tessa caught the binder, slapped it into place around the patient's hips. The woman's eyes fluttered. Her pulse felt like it was slipping away from the skin. Tessa leaned close. "Stay with me, don't go." The woman tried to focus. Cold, she whispered. Maya's gaze locked onto the woman's hands. The nails were turning pale, then blue at the edges. Shock was moving in like tidewater, quiet and unstoppable. "Warm blankets," Maya said. A nurse hesitated. "We're out in this bay." Maya turned open a cabinet without searching, pulled 2 blankets like she had already checked. She wrapped them tight, not for comfort, for survival. A resident tried to place an IV and missed. The needle scraped. Blood beaded, then stopped. The resident's hands shook. Maya stepped in, and for a split second she paused, not because she was afraid, but because she was reading the body like terrain. "Here," she said, tapping a vein that was barely visible. The resident looked where she pointed. He tried again, hit it. Blood returned. The woman's pulse stayed present. Thin, but present. The 4th patient rolled in behind her, a woman in her early 30s, shivering so hard the gurney rattled. Her hair was matted with rain. Her eyes were bright with fear. "I'm fine," she insisted through chattering teeth. "I'm fine, I just need to go home." A resident glanced at the monitor. "Vitals look okay." Tessa didn't trust okay. Tessa trusted patterns. But the room was drowning. Okay was tempting. Maya stood at the side of the bed and took the woman's wrist. Her fingers went still, not with panic, with recognition. The pulse was there, but it was wrong. Too fast, too thin, the kind that ran ahead of collapse. Maya leaned close. "Look at me," she said, her voice low and steady. "Stay with me." The woman blinked, trying to keep her focus, fighting the closing of her eyelids like it was sleep. "I'm tired," she whispered. "You're not tired," Maya said. "You're fading." The resident bristled. "Her blood pressure is normal." Maya didn't argue. She lowered the head of the bed by a notch, just enough to change blood flow. She signaled to Tessa. "Fluids," Maya said. Tessa moved immediately because she trusted the way Maya's voice never wavered. Briggs stepped forward. "Stop. You can't just order." Maya looked at him again. "For now," she said, and the words weren't defiance. They were a timestamp. The woman's eyes rolled back a fraction. The monitor beeped, then beeped faster. Then the blood pressure began to slide. The resident's face changed. Tessa's mouth tightened. "Now you see it." The 5th patient arrived last, and he shouldn't have survived the ride. A man in his 20s or 30s, it was hard to tell through the blood in the sheet. His breathing was shallow, wet, broken. Every inhale sounded like it had to fight its way through damage. The paramedics were shouting now, and their professionalism had cracks. "Penetrating trauma," one yelled, and nobody asked where it came from because it didn't matter in the moment. "He's bleeding out. We're losing him." The room surged toward Trauma 1, then realized Trauma 1 was occupied, then split like a river around a rock. They pushed him into an overflow space, a bay that wasn't designed for this. A bay that didn't have the right equipment. The monitor screamed at them. A resident shouted, "Get Mercer on the phone now." Another voice answered, "He's still stuck." Briggs stepped in, voice tight. "Nobody touches him until the attending arrives." Maya stood against the wall where Briggs had told her to stay. She watched the man's chest rise, then stall, then rise again, like it was deciding whether to continue. She watched the pause stretch just a second too long. She watched it cross a line. She took one step forward. "We don't have time," she said. Briggs spun on her eyes, bright with anger and fear. "I said, don't touch." The patient made a sound, a wet, broken gasp, that ended the argument the way gravity ends debate. Maya was already there. Her hands moved to the wound with a precision that did not belong to a new hire. She applied pressure with the kind of control that understood anatomy, not just first aid. The bleeding didn't stop. It slowed. That was the point. The room went quiet for half a second. Not because the alarms stopped, because everyone's brain paused to process what they were seeing. Tessa stepped in beside her without speaking, handing her gauze, handing her tools because the work had become more important than the question of who had the right to do it. A tech fumbled with suction. Maya spoke without looking up. Angle it lower. You're pulling air. The tech adjusted. The sound changed. The patient's breathing eased a fraction. Briggs stood at the foot of the bed, rigid, watching control slip away from him, watching a nurse do something he had told her not to do, and watching it work. He swallowed his pride and spoke to Tessa, voice lower. "We're going to get sued." Tessa didn't glance at him. "We're going to get a funeral if we don't move." The 2 hours that followed did not feel like 2 hours. They felt like a single long breath that nobody was allowed to exhale. Time became a series of small decisions. A syringe drawn up before someone asked for it. A line flushed before it clogged. A bag hung before the pressure dropped. Maya moved through the bays like she belonged to the spaces between tasks, the gaps that killed people if nobody filled them. She didn't take charge. She didn't announce herself. She simply appeared where the work was failing and fixed it before anyone had to admit it had been failing. When the driver's pulse faltered again, a resident panicked, fingers too fast, mine too slow. Maya placed a hand on his shoulder. "Breathe," she said, "then move." It wasn't comfort, it was command. He breathed. He moved. When the second patient started to cough blood, the room tilted toward fear. Maya leaned close to his face, voice steady. "Don't fight your breath," she said. "Give it space." The patient's eyes locked on hers like she was a rope thrown into deep water. When the third patient's pressure dropped again, someone shouted for blood. A tech replied that the cooler hadn't arrived. Maya went to the hallway, found the runner, and pointed with 2 fingers. "You. Now. Blood bank. Don't stop." The runner didn't ask why. He ran. It was the way she spoke. Not loud, not pleading, certain. At one point, Tessa caught Maya at the supply cabinet restocking without being asked, checking seals like she didn't trust the world. Tessa lowered her voice. "Where'd you learn to do that?" Maya didn't pause. On nights when missing one item meant you didn't get another chance. Tessa's throat tightened. She looked away because she wasn't ready for that answer. Briggs kept trying to reassert control by calling rules. He kept losing to reality. At 1:42 a.m., he stepped toward Maya. As she finished rewrapping the 5th patient's pressure dressing hand, steady blood on her gloves. "You're a nurse," he said, voice sharp. "You don't get to make surgical calls." Maya's eyes stayed on the patient. "I'm not making surgical calls," she said. "I'm buying minutes." Briggs's face reddened. "You don't even talk like you belong here." Maya finally looked at him, and the look held no hatred. It held something older. "I belong where people are dying," she said quietly. "That's the only qualification that matters tonight." Briggs opened his mouth to reply, but another alarm cut him off. The 4th patient's pressure dipped hard. Tessa swore under her breath and moved. Maya was already there, adjusting the bed, calling for a fluid bolus, checking the woman's pupils like she was reading a map. A resident stared. "How do you know she's going to crash before she does?" Maya didn't answer the question the way he wanted. She answered with action. "Because she's already crashing," Maya said. "The monitor is just late." Outside the hospital, the rain kept coming. On the E-way, Nolan Mercer was still trapped behind a wall of brake lights and flashing hazard signals. A wreck up ahead had choked the road. Cars crawled in a slow, miserable line. Mercer's phone buzzed again and again. Missed calls. Texts that grew shorter. Trauma alert. Multiple critical. Need you. He tightened his grip on the wheel until his knuckles went pale. He found a gap and forced his car onto a side street, tires cutting through standing water. He took turns too fast. He didn't care. He was already late inside his own head, replaying every second that he wasn't there. At 2:03 a.m., the first patient stabilized enough to move toward imaging, but not enough to feel safe. Tessa watched him go with a stare that didn't blink, like if she looked away he would stop being alive. The second patient was finally breathing without clawing at the air. He reached for Tessa's sleeve. "Am I?" he began. Tessa leaned in. "You're here," she said. "Stay here." He nodded, tears mixing with blood on his cheek. The third patient's hands were warmer now, not warm, but not ice. The pelvic binder held. The bleeding was not gone, but it was controlled enough to keep the pulse in her wrist. Maya checked the woman's eyes and saw them track her for a second, gratitude flickering in confusion. "Don't waste your breath talking," Maya said softly. "Save it." The woman tried to speak anyway. No sound came out. Maya squeezed her hand once, not a comfort gesture, a grounding one. The fourth patient's pressure climbed back from the edge enough that the room stopped holding its breath. She whispered something about her kids. Maya leaned close. "Tell them later," she said, "not now." The fifth patient was still the worst. Every minute with him felt like stealing from something that would demand repayment. Maya's hands stayed on the wound pressure, constant posture steady. Her shoulders ached. She didn't move them. She didn't complain. Tessa came in beside her for a moment, voice low. "You need a break." Maya's eyes never left the man's chest. "If I lift my hands, he's gone." Tessa didn't argue. She just shifted her stance so her body blocked Maya from view, an instinctive shield against questions. At 2:16 a.m., the sound of running footsteps cut through the hallway. A door slammed. A voice called, "He's here." Nolan Mercer pushed through the ER doors with his coat half on, gloves still in his hands, rainwater dripping from his hair. His chest rose and fell too fast for a man who wanted to appear composed. He stopped as if the floor had become a wall. 5 patients, still breathing. The staff moved with that exhausted focus that only came after surviving a long fight. Supplies were out of place, but in a way that made sense. Lines taped clean. Dressings tight. Equipment staged like someone had been thinking ahead. Mercer's eyes swept from bay to bay, taking in the impossible like he was trying to locate the trick. He turned toward the first trauma bay, saw the driver's chart, saw the interventions documented with timestamps that didn't include his name. He frowned deeper and looked around for the person who had been in command. No one stepped forward. In the overflow bay, he saw a nurse kneeling beside the 5th patient, hand still applying pressure with the unwavering steadiness of someone who did not fear blood or panic. Mercer walked toward her slower now, as if he had entered a room where the rules were different. He watched her fingers. He watched the angle of her wrists, the way she held pressure without wasting strength. "That's not hospital training," he said quietly. The nurse didn't look up at first. She finished securing the dressing, checked the patient's pulse, then lifted her eyes to him. Maya Kincaid's gaze met his without apology. Mercer's voice dropped even lower. "Where did you learn to work like that?" Maya's face didn't change. "We bought them time," she said. The words landed wrong in the air, not incorrect, just unfamiliar, like a phrase carried in from somewhere the hospital walls could not keep out. Mercer stared at her for a long beat, then glanced at the nearest workstation where the electronic audit trail glowed with timestamps. One name kept appearing, Maya Kincaid. He stared at it longer than he intended to because the ER had survived the night, but his instincts told him the night had left something behind. Mercer stared at it longer than he meant to, not because the name was unfamiliar, but because the pattern was. A rookie nurse did not appear in the audit trail like that. A rookie nurse did not show up beside decisions that carried weight, the kind that came with the signatures and lawsuits and committee reviews that happened months after the blood was scrubbed from the floor. He moved through the bays without speaking for a moment, reading the room the way he read a trauma CT, looking for the fracture line. Nurses were slumped against counters, eyes, glassy hands still moving out of habit. Residents hovered near workstations pretending to chart, while their attention kept snapping back to Maya like magnets. Tessa Rowe met his gaze once as he passed. Her face was tired, but her posture stayed squared like she was still bracing for impact. Mercer stopped beside the driver from Trauma 1. The young man's chest rose and fell with mechanical help, but it rose and fell. Mercer ran his eyes over the chart, then over the taped lines, the placement of the pads, the way the dressing had been layered to control seepage without cutting off circulation. It was not pretty. It was not textbook. It was efficient. He looked toward Briggs. The resident was standing too straight, as if posture could rebuild authority. Mercer's voice was quiet. Who made the call on decompression? Briggs opened his mouth. His throat worked. We did. Mercer waited. Briggs's eyes darted toward Maya and away again. The team. Mercer turned his head slightly. I am not asking for a slogan, Doctor. Briggs swallowed. Nurse Kincaid started the sequence. Mercer nodded once, not approval, not disbelief. Just the acceptance of an inconvenient fact. He crossed to the second patient, the talker who had almost fooled them. The man's eyes were closed, now oxygen line resting against his cheek. The breathing was smoother. Mercer traced the notes. Upright positioning. Early respiratory consult. Intervention logged before the crash and saturation. He said again, softer almost to himself, not hospital training. Tessa heard him anyway. That girl saw it, she said. Mercer looked at her. What did she say? Tessa hesitated, then answered honestly. She said his body was lying. Mercer's gaze shifted back to Maya. She was wiping down a counter that was already clean, restocking a tray, as if order could protect the room from memory. She moved like she was trying to disappear into the work. Mercer walked toward her station. The closer he got, the more the department seemed to adjust, like people were making room for a conversation they did not want to overhear, but could not stop listening to. Maya, he said. She looked up immediately, not startled, not flinching, just attentive. He kept his voice low. You bought them time. Yes, she said. You understand what you did tonight is going to be reviewed. I understand, she said. He studied her face. It was young enough to belong in orientation. It held something older anyway. Not cynicism, calibration. What is your training? He asked. I am a nurse, she said. Mercer exhaled through his nose. He had spent his life around people who answered questions the way they wanted to answer, not the way they were asked. Maya's answer was clean, accurate, incomplete. Before he could ask again, an overhead announcement crackled. ICU transport, radiology requests, the ER trying to reset itself into routine. Mercer glanced at the workstation again at the audit trail still open. Maya's name repeated. His mind caught on the repetition like a hook. He closed the screen with a decisive click, but the question stayed open inside him. By dawn, the rain had thinned to a steady drizzle that made Norfolk look washed out and sleepless. The windows along the corridor turned into mirrors, reflecting nurses who looked more alert than they felt. The night had retreated, but it had not released its grip. It simply tightened into a different form. In recovery rooms, the 5 crash victims lay surrounded by machines, humming their vigilant songs. Family members arrived in clusters faces, pale voices held low like church. When they saw their loved ones still alive, relief hit them in waves. Some cried silently. Some spoke too fast. Some stood perfectly still as if movement might break the fragile fact of survival. Mercer did his rounds with a strange heaviness in his chest. He should have been grateful. He was grateful. He was also unsettled. Those feelings were not opposites. They lived side by side in the same tight space. At 8:42 a.m., he stepped into the administrative corridor and felt the air change. The carpet was thicker. The lights were warmer. The walls held framed photos of smiling donors and ribbon cuttings. This wing did not smell like antiseptic and adrenaline. It smelled like money and polish. Harold Sloan, the hospital director, met him outside a conference room with Celia Vance at his shoulder. Celia wore a tailored suit like armor, her hair smooth, her expression pleasant in the way lawyers learn to be pleasant when delivering harm. Harold smiled as Mercer approached. Nolan, long night. Mercer's eyes were tired, not soft. 5 patients are alive. Harold's smile held. Yes, We are grateful for the team response. Mercer heard the emphasis. Team. Not person. Not the name that kept repeating in his head. Celia opened a folder. We need to discuss messaging. Mercer did not move into the room. What messaging? Celia's tone stayed calm, professional, like she was explaining a policy update. A local crew is already outside. Social media is circulating security footage. The narrative is forming with or without us, Harold added. We want to be proactive. Mercer looked past them through the glass door at the conference table inside. There were printed charts spread out not for clinical review, but for liability. He recognized his own signature on some pages. He recognized Maya's handwriting on others. He said, we should be proactive about thanking the nurse who kept them alive. Celia's eyes did not blink. We should be cautious about elevating any single staff member while facts are still being gathered. Mercer felt his jaw tighten. What facts? Harold's smile weakened just a fraction. An internal review. Standard process. Celia turned a page. We are issuing a statement praising preparedness and teamwork during a challenging overnight trauma event. Mercer stared at the draft. The language was clean, safe, hollow. It gave credit to the hospital, not the hands. He pointed at the paragraph where a name could have been. She is not mentioned. Harold spoke gently, as if explaining something to a resident. If we mention her, we invite questions we cannot answer publicly. Mercer's eyes sharpened. What questions? Celia answered. Credentials, scope, authorization, our legal exposure. Mercer took a slow breath. He had argued in operating rooms. He had argued with families who needed miracles. He had argued with death itself. This felt worse because the enemy wore a friendly face. You are treating her like a risk, he said. Celia's smile turned slightly colder. We are treating the situation like a risk. The hospital is the risk. Harold glanced at his phone. They are setting up outside the ambulance bay. Celia slid the statement across the table. We need you aligned. Mercer did not pick it up. I need facts before I align with anything. Harold's voice stayed soft, but there was steel under it now. Then get them, quietly, without making this bigger. Mercer held Harold's gaze, bigger than 5 near fatalities. Harold did not answer. He did not have to. The word bigger meant headlines, lawsuits, donor panic, board pressure, careers. Mercer turned away without signing anything. As he walked back toward the clinical wing, he could already hear the reporters outside. Their voices carried through glass practiced in bright rehearsing tragedy like a script. A camera lens turned toward the entrance and waited. Inside the ER, the staff moved with that careful gentleness that came after trauma, the way hands moved slower because the mind was still catching up. Maya was at the nurse's station charting. She looked unchanged, but Mercer could see the faint tension in her shoulders, the kind that built when you knew you were being watched. Tessa leaned against the counter and watched the doors. You see them, Mercer said quietly. Tessa nodded. They have been out there since sunrise. Briggs walked past them, face tight. He looked like a man who had survived a storm and now needed someone to blame for being wet. Mercer said to Tessa, Where is Maya's preceptor? Called out, Tessa said. Lucky timing. Mercer felt a flicker of irritation at the universe. A new nurse on the worst night without her assigned oversight, and she still outperformed half the department. He looked toward Maya. Tell her to come to my office. Tessa's eyes narrowed. For what? For a conversation, Mercer said. Tessa watched him, reading him the way she read a pulse. Then she nodded once and walked to Maya without dramatics. Maya followed Mercer down the hall a minute later. The corridor felt louder in daylight, full of routine sounds that could not erase the night. People looked at her as she passed. Their stares were not hostile. They were uncertain. That was worse. Mercer's office blinds were half drawn, casting stripes of light across the desk. The legal pad was still there from earlier, filled with notes from calls and questions he had not yet asked. Maya stood just inside the door. She did not sit until he gestured. Mercer closed the door. I reviewed the audit trail. Maya nodded once. You were logged in places you should not have been, Mercer said. Maya's expression stayed neutral. I used my badge where it was available. That is not what I mean. She met his eyes. People were dying. Mercer held her gaze. The directness of it made him pause. He said if you were wrong, you understand what would happen. Maya's voice stayed level. If I waited, I know what would happen. Mercer leaned back slightly, studying her. That line you used, we bought them time. Maya did not shift. It is the truth, Mercer asked. Where did you learn to speak like that? Silence stretched between them. It was not the silence of refusal. It was the silence of calculation. Maya finally said in places where time is counted differently. Mercer's pulse ticked once in his throat. Military. Maya's eyes did not confirm. They did not deny. She said, I have seen emergencies before. Mercer exhaled slowly. Risk management is going to ask questions. Maya nodded. They should. Mercer's voice softened just a fraction. I am not trying to trap you. I know, Maya said. He realized she did know. That bothered him. Most people in trouble assumed the worst. Maya assumed the situation and prepared for it. Mercer said, are there gaps in your timeline? Maya's hands remained folded in her lap. There are years I do not talk about. Mercer waited. Maya added, not because of crime, because of agreement. Mercer felt cold settle in his stomach. There was a knock at the door. Not gentle, not urgent, controlled. Mercer opened it to find Harold Sloane's assistant standing there with a tight expression. Dr. Mercer, she said. 2 individuals are here to see you. They said it cannot wait. They are in the conference room. Mercer looked back at Maya. Stay here. Maya did not argue. When Mercer entered the conference room, the 2 people rose. Plain clothes, boring jackets, faces that blended into crowds on purpose. They flashed badges quickly and almost apologetically. Dr. Mercer, the man said. Agent Grant Heller, this is Agent Sophia Reyes. Mercer felt the muscles in his shoulders tighten. FBI. Reyes nodded. We need to speak about Nurse Maya Kincaid. Mercer did not hide his surprise. On what basis? Heller opened a folder and slid it across the table. We have a personnel inquiry. We are following anomalies. Mercer glanced at the page. It was not a criminal record. It was a timeline with blank spaces like missing teeth. Educational institutions listed with transfer dates, licensing numbers. A name with a note beside it that made his eyes narrow. Reyes watched him carefully. She began using this identity 3 years ago. Mercer kept his voice controlled. Is she accused of anything? Heller's tone stayed neutral. Not at this time. We are asking questions. Mercer tapped the page lightly. You do not show up for routine questions. Reyes did not flinch. We did not come for routine. Heller leaned forward slightly. We also need assurance that the hospital will preserve all records related to last night's incident. Mercer looked at them. Because of patient outcomes. Heller's mouth tightened. Because of personnel involvement. Mercer's mind returned to Maya's calm, to the phrasing, to the way her hands had moved over the 5th patient's wound like she had done it in worse places. He asked, were you ever employed by the Department of Defense? Reyes paused before answering. Doctor, we are not here to discuss agency details. Mercer stared. That is not an answer. Heller's voice remained polite. It is the answer we can give you. Mercer felt something shift. The hospital did not hire a nurse with a messy background. It hired a problem someone else had been managing. Reyes continued. We will need to interview her. Mercer said I already spoke with her. Heller's eyes sharpened. This will be formal. Mercer asked, do you want her removed from patient care? Reyes exchanged a glance with Heller. We want her available. Mercer's jaw tightened. That is not the same thing. Heller closed the folder. Doctor, the media attention is complicating this. We advise discretion. Mercer's voice went cold. You advise discretion while you walk into my hospital. Heller did not react. We do what we need to do. They left without offering hands. Mercer stood alone in the conference room for a moment, staring at the chair where they had sat. The air still held their presence the way some people left behind a sense of authority, like a scent. When he returned to his office, Maya was standing near the window looking down at the parking lot where cameras were visible beyond the glass. She turned when he entered as if she had been listening for his footsteps. He closed the door. "Federal agents are here." Maya's face did not change. Only her eyes tightened slightly. "I guessed." Mercer stared at her. "You guessed." Maya's voice was quiet. "You do not get a crowd like that without someone asking questions somewhere." Mercer felt a pulse of frustration, not at her, at the fact that she was right again. He said, "They flagged inconsistencies in your background check." Maya's hands remained still. "Nothing criminal." Mercer watched her. "You knew that too." Maya did not deny it. "She said I did not lie about my license." Mercer asked, "Did you lie about your past?" Silence again. Not refusal. Control. Maya finally said, "I did what I was supposed to do." Mercer held her gaze. "According to who?" Maya's voice stayed even. "Not the hospital." Mercer let that sit. Then he said, "They will interview you." Maya nodded once. "I will answer what I can." Mercer's phone buzzed. A message from Harold. "Meeting now." Mercer glanced at it and felt the noose tighten. He had spent the night fighting to keep people alive. Now the hospital wanted to fight to keep itself clean. He looked at Maya. "Do not speak to the media." Maya's mouth moved in something close to a bitter smile that never fully formed. "I was not planning to." Mercer left his office and walked back toward administration. In the corridor, two nurses whispered and stopped when he passed. A resident pretended to read a chart while watching Maya's door. The air was already changing. When a mystery entered a hospital, everyone wanted to be the first to label it. At noon, the hospital released its statement. It praised teamwork, it praised preparedness, it praised the facility itself. Maya's name was not in it. By 1 o'clock, that omission had become its own story. A local anchor posted a grainy still from security footage. 5 gurneys visible. A figure in scrubs moving between them like a conductor. Caption: "Who is this nurse?" The question spread faster than any official message. In the break room, the television played the segment on a loop. Footage of ambulances. The hospital facade in early light. A reporter speaking with the bright tone of someone who knew tragedy generated views. 5 victims survive a devastating overnight crash. Lead trauma surgeon delayed by traffic. Hospital staff rises to the challenge. Maya watched for 10 seconds, then turned the screen off without drama. A junior nurse sitting nearby blurted, "They are talking about you." Maya looked at her. "They are talking around me." The nurse did not know what to say to that. That afternoon, Mercer found himself in another meeting, this time with Harold and Celia, and a legal pad full of words that were designed to protect buildings, not bodies. Celia spoke with her hands folded neatly. "Given the attention and the inquiry, we believe it is prudent to place Nurse Kincaid on administrative leave." Mercer's eyes snapped up. "No." Harold's voice stayed calm, temporary. Mercer felt heat rise under his skin. "She just kept 5 people alive." Celia's expression remained composed. "She also performed interventions that will be examined. We need clarity." Mercer leaned forward. "Or you need distance." Harold sighed. "Nolan, you know how this works." Mercer's voice went flat. "Yes, I do." Celia slid a form across the table. "Paid leave. We frame it as standard procedure. We remove fuel from the media fire." Mercer looked at the paper and felt something close to disgust. "You are using her as a fire break." Harold's smile returned thin and tired. "We are protecting the hospital." Mercer stood. "And who is protecting her?" Celia answered without emotion. "She can retain counsel." Mercer stared at them both. Then he left the meeting without taking the form. He found Maya near the supply room restocking again, hands moving in the quiet ritual of someone who trusted objects more than institutions. "Maya," he said. She turned. She read his face instantly. "It happened," she said. Mercer hated how quickly she understood. "There is an inquiry," he said. Federal, and administration is placing you on leave. Maya went still for 1 second. Only one. Then she resumed movement, closing the supply cabinet like she was sealing something away. Administrative leave, she said. Yes, Mercer replied. Paid. How long? Mercer's jaw tightened. Until they have clarity. Maya's gaze held his. They will not get it. Mercer swallowed. I'm trying to stop this. Maya shook her head once. Do not bleed for me. Mercer's voice sharpened. You bled for my patients. Maya's eyes softened just a fraction. That was the job. Mercer watched her, and something in him shifted again. He had assumed he would be the one teaching residents how to handle pressure. Tonight, he had watched a nurse teach the entire room what decisive calm looked like. Do you want to leave? He asked. Maya answered immediately, no. Mercer nodded. Then do not disappear. Maya's mouth tightened. I have practice at that. She walked to the locker room with the quiet steadiness of someone who had been told to vanish before. Mercer followed at a distance, not escorting, not hovering, just present. In the locker room, Maya opened her locker for the last time. Inside, a folded jacket, a notebook with soft, worn corners, and tucked behind it, the thin silver bracelet. She slid it onto her wrist without looking down, as if she needed its weight to anchor her. Then she shut the locker door. The metal click sounded final. When Maya walked past the nurse's station, conversations dipped. A few heads turned. Someone whispered, "Thank you." Maya did not stop. She did not perform humility. She simply left, moving through the lobby where cameras waited outside like predators with patience. Mercer stood at a window and watched her disappear into the drizzle. That evening, long after the day shift tried to pretend the hospital was normal again, Mercer sat alone in his office with the lights off. The glow of his computer screen was the only illumination. He told himself he was tying up loose ends. He told himself it was professional diligence. He told himself curiosity was not the same as suspicion. Then he opened Maya Kincaid's personnel file again and ran the certification number through a verification system that civilian hospitals were not supposed to need. The result did not come back invalid. It came back with one word that drained warmth from the room. Restricted. Mercer stared at it until his eyes burned. He refreshed. The word stayed. His phone rang. No caller ID. He answered anyway. A man's voice spoke with careful enunciation as if every syllable mattered in rooms Mercer had never entered. Dr. Mercer. Mercer's grip tightened. Who is this? I'm going to advise you not to pursue this any further, the voice said. Mercer felt his pulse climb. Is she a threat? A pause. Then she is a complication. Mercer's jaw clenched. To who? The voice did not answer that. It said, there are protections in place. There are reasons you are not cleared to understand. Mercer leaned forward, anger sharpening into focus. 5 people are alive because of her. That is the only reason I need. Another pause. The voice cooled. Your need does not change your clearance. The line went dead. Mercer sat very still, the phone pressed to his ear, listening to nothing. Outside his office, the hospital settled into night sounds again. Footsteps. Distant alarms. The building breathing. Mercer lowered the phone slowly and looked at the screen where the word restricted still glowed. Somewhere in Norfolk, Maya was sitting in an apartment too quiet for a person who lived by alarms, and Mercer realized the hospital had removed the one person who moved faster than bureaucracy. He opened a new window on his computer and began searching for the name he had just been warned not to chase. The cursor blinked on Mercer's screen like a pulse he could not find. He tried the certification number again through a different portal, one he only used when a travel nurse's paperwork looked off, or a board audit came due. Same result. Not invalid, not expired, not missing. Restricted. He sat back, the office dark except for the monitor glow. The hospital outside his door had settled into that late evening hush where footsteps sounded louder than they should and every distant alarm felt personal. He told himself he was doing this for patient safety. He told himself it was due diligence. The truth sat underneath both explanations, sharp and simple. He did not like being lied to. He opened the state licensing database. Maya Kincaid appeared with a clean record and a license that checked out if you only looked at the surface. No discipline, no flags, no obvious holes. It was the kind of profile that existed to calm a nervous employer. He clicked deeper. Education history. Transfers. Dates. The dates lined up too neatly, like someone had ironed the wrinkles out. Mercer copied the old certification number and searched it in a general index. A name came back that was not Maya Kincaid. A different first name. A last name he did not recognize. The entry was incomplete, sealed behind a permissions request he did not have access to file. He leaned forward and stared at the screen, jaw tight. The phone call he had taken earlier replayed in his head, the voice that sounded careful, the word clearance used like a fence. He looked at the hospital badge on his desk, the one that opened doors he had spent years earning. Not enough doors, apparently. He opened the audit trail again. Patient 1. Intervention logged. Patient 2. Positioning change. Patient 3. Supply cabinet access. Patient 5. A pressure dressing that had kept a man from bleeding out on a gurney in a bay that was never meant to hold that kind of injury. Maya Kincaid. He clicked through the timestamps and realized he could reconstruct the night from her footprint alone. He could see where she had been, what she had touched, what she had chosen. The pattern was not reckless. It was disciplined. It was the kind of discipline that only formed when mistakes cost more than a scolding. He closed the file and rubbed his eyes, feeling grit under his lids. When he opened them again, he made a decision that had nothing to do with policy. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Tessa Rowe's number. She answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded like she had never fully left the ER Mercer. "Are the 5 stable?" he asked. "Stable enough to scare me," she said. "The worst one is hanging on. I see you as watching him like a hawk." Mercer's gaze flicked to the screen again. "And Maya." A short pause. She left. Tessa said, "I know." Tessa exhaled the sound half anger and half exhaustion. They walked her out like a problem. Mercer felt heat flare in his chest. Did she say anything? "No," Tessa replied. She doesn't waste words when the room is loud. Mercer stared at the dark window beside his desk, rain still tapping faintly against the glass. "Tessa, did you see anything tonight that looked unsafe?" Tessa's answer came without hesitation. "I saw people alive who should not be." "That's not what I asked." Tessa's voice sharpened. "I saw a nurse fill the gaps. I saw a resident stop freezing. I saw a room move because someone decided it had to." Mercer closed his eyes briefly. "If administration asks, I need you honest." Tessa made a sound that could have been a laugh if she had energy for it. "They don't want honest. They want clean." Mercer didn't argue. He said, "Get some sleep." "Funny," she said. "You too." He ended the call and sat still for a moment. Then he opened a browser window, typed in a phrase that felt ridiculous and necessary, and hit search. Restricted certification number, federal authority. Most results were dead ends. Forums. Outdated PDFs. Regulation summaries that danced around specifics. He refined it. He searched by fragments of the number. He searched by the board that should have issued it. He searched by the obscure acronym that appeared in one of the back-end fields, a string of letters that looked like it belonged in a military database, not a civilian hospital. Nothing. And then something. A short entry in a professional directory, buried under layers of bland medical networking, referenced a program he had never heard of but instantly disliked. A training designation that did not exist in any civilian curriculum, paired with a unit name that sounded like it had been created to disappear. He clicked it and found the page blocked. He leaned back slowly, feeling the room tighten. His phone buzzed. A text from Harold Sloan. "Board is asking questions. Do not escalate." Mercer stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then he set the phone down, face up, like he wanted it to keep challenging him. Across town, Maya Kincaid sat in an apartment that felt too large when it was quiet. Her place was small, a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an older building, where the hallway smelled faintly of bleach and fried food from someone's late dinner. She had moved in with the kind of efficiency that left no trace of indecision. A few plates, a kettle, a couch that had seen better decades, a folding table that served as a desk, nothing on the walls. Now the silence pressed in like a physical thing. In the ER, silence never lasted. Even when a bay was empty, the machines hummed. The air moved. Someone called out a name. A monitor chirped in warning. Life announced itself constantly. Here life waited. Maya stood at the kitchen sink and washed a mug that was already clean. Soap bubbled around her fingers. She watched the suds swirl down the drain and tried not to listen for alarms that were not there. Her phone lit up again. Unknown number. She let it ring until it stopped. No voicemail. Another call followed a minute later, another unknown number, then a text from someone she had not spoken to in years. "Saw you on the news, is that you?" Maya stared at the screen without blinking. Her thumb moved. Delete. The message vanished like it had never existed. She set the phone down with the screen against the table as if light itself could betray her. She walked to the small closet by the door and opened it. Inside hung 2 jackets. One was an ordinary winter coat. The other was a plain, dark jacket with pockets arranged for function, not fashion. She touched the fabric once, then closed the door. On the counter beside her keys sat the silver bracelet. She had taken it off when she came home like removing a piece of armor. Now she picked it up again and slid it back onto her wrist. The weight settled. Familiar. Quiet. She turned on the faucet and let the water run until it was hot enough to sting. Then she shut it off and stood there anyway, hands resting on the edge of the sink, head bowed slightly as if listening to something beneath the building. A knock sounded at the door. Not frantic, not polite. Measured, deliberate. Maya's shoulders didn't jump. She didn't rush. She moved to the door with the same steady pace she used in the ER. She checked the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway. About Maya's age. Dark hair pulled back tight. No makeup, no jewelry. A simple jacket, plain shoes, posture straight without being stiff. She held something in her hand but didn't wave it like a threat. The woman looked directly at the peephole as if she could see through it. Maya didn't open the door yet. The woman lifted the badge just enough to be visible. The seal was not FBI. The lettering was small. Federal, Navy. She spoke through the door voice, calm. "Maya Kincaid, I'm Aaron Caldwell. I'm not here to detain you. I need to talk." Maya waited 1 beat longer, weighing the angles. Then she unlocked the door and opened it just far enough to keep control. Aaron's eyes flicked briefly across the apartment, not invasive, just assessing. She didn't step in until Maya stepped aside. They sat at the small kitchen table. Aaron didn't pull out a notebook. She didn't turn on a recorder. She didn't start with the obvious. She looked at Maya's hands resting on the table at the bracelet on her wrist. "You did good work last night," Aaron said. Maya didn't respond to praise. "Why are you here?" Aaron's gaze held steady. "Because you were supposed to stay quiet." Maya's eyes narrowed slightly. "I was working." Aaron nodded as if that answer fit into a file. Working draws attention. Attention draws questions. Questions reach places that do not like being reached. Maya leaned back, a fraction chair creaking softly. "If you are here to threaten me, do it clean." Aaron's mouth tightened, not offended, just tired. "I'm here to keep this from turning into something you don't control." Maya's voice stayed level. "I don't control any of it." Aaron studied her for a moment. "You control more than you think. That's part of the problem." Maya didn't ask what that meant. She had learned long ago that some explanations were bait. Aaron's eyes drifted to the window, to the city lights beyond the rain. "Do you remember Mosul?" The word landed in the room with weight. Not loud, not dramatic. Heavy. Maya went still in a way that was almost invisible. Only a slight tightening in her jaw, a faint shift in her breathing. "Yes," Maya said. Aaron nodded slowly. "You were attached to a unit operating there." a unit that didn't officially exist in any reports that made it back stateside. Maya's gaze dropped to the table for half a second, then lifted again. If it didn't exist, you don't have a reason to be saying it out loud. Aaron's voice remained calm. I have a reason. Your hospital doesn't. Maya's fingers curled once, then relaxed. What do you want? Aaron leaned back slightly, giving space without giving distance. I want to know if you understand what happened last night. I kept people alive, Maya said. Aaron watched her closely. You kept them alive using skills that belonged to a file someone buried. Maya's lips pressed together. They were bleeding. Aaron's gaze sharpened. You started as a medic. Maya didn't correct her. Aaron continued. Then you became something else. Something without a clean designation. You learned to make decisions with limited equipment, limited time, and no safety net. Maya's eyes stayed steady. That's what medicine is. Aaron let the silence sit for a moment. Not here, she said. Here people ask permission. There people act. Maya's voice cooled. People die in both places. Aaron's expression softened slightly, like she recognized the truth and hated it. Your reports indicate you treated wounded personnel under conditions that didn't match protocol. Maya's jaw tightened. Protocols break. Aaron nodded. They do. And when they break, the people who survive become inconvenient to the people who write them. Maya's fingers tapped the bracelet once in unconscious motion. Is this about last night or about then? Aaron's eyes held hers. Last night made then visible. Maya leaned forward. I didn't experiment on anyone. Aaron didn't flinch. I didn't say you did. Maya's voice sharpened anyway, controlled but firm. People loved that story. The rogue medic, the secret program, the illegal methods. It makes paperwork feel righteous. Aaron's gaze stayed calm. What happened wasn't about illegal methods. It was about politics, about optics, about leadership wanting neat narratives you don't fit neat. Maya sat back again. So you buried me. Aaron's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger and correction. I didn't. I was junior. I watched it happen. Maya's face didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. And now you're here because the grave won't stay closed. Aaron exhaled slowly. I'm here because someone at your hospital ran a number they weren't supposed to run. Maya didn't look surprised. Dr. Mercer. Aaron's mouth tightened. Yes, he's a surgeon. He sees a seam and he pulls. Maya's gaze lowered for a beat, as if she was imagining Mercer's stubborn focus the way his eyes had scanned the ER like a crime scene. He's not wrong to ask. Aaron's tone stayed neutral. He's wrong to ask in the wrong places. Maya stared at her. So, tell me, what is your real job? Aaron paused. My real job is to make sure people like you don't become headlines. Maya's eyes flicked to the phone on the table face down. Too late. Aaron looked towards the door. It's not too late. Not yet. Maya's voice was quiet. You came to warn me. Aaron nodded once. Stay available. Don't leave town. Don't answer unknown numbers. If anyone says they want to help you tell your story, they don't. Maya's lips curved, slightly humorless. I don't tell stories. Aaron's gaze returned to the bracelet. You carry them. Maya didn't respond. Aaron stood movements economical. She didn't offer her hand. She didn't say thank you. She moved toward the door like someone trained to exit without leaving a mess. At the threshold, she stopped and turned back. One more thing, Aaron said. Maya waited. Aaron's voice dropped slightly, still calm. If you hear a knock that sounds like it expects to be answered, don't pretend you're not home. That won't help. Maya's eyes narrowed. Who? Aaron didn't answer directly. Just stay available. Then she left. The hallway swallowed her footsteps. Maya stood by the closed door for a long moment, listening to the building settle. Somewhere a television played muffled voices through a neighbor's wall. Somewhere a couple argued softly. Somewhere a dog barked once and stopped. Maya walked back to the table and sat down again, hands resting flat as if she could hold the apartment steady by force. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She didn't pick it up. Across town, Tidewater Regional looked calm from the outside. The rain had eased to a fine mist that made the parking lot lights glow. Families went home. Day shift handed off to evening shift. The hospital performed normalcy like it was a skill. Inside, the 5 crash victims lay in rooms where machines did their quiet vigil. Nurses moved in soft steps. Visitors whispered. In ICU. The worst one, the man Maya had held together with pressure and refusal, drifted in and out under sedation. His blood pressure held, then trembled, then held again. The monitors spoke in steady beats that were only steady because someone watched them like a hawk. Tessa Rowe came on shift again, sooner than she should have. She had gone home, tried to sleep, failed, and returned. She told herself it was for continuity. She told herself the unit needed her. The truth was simpler. When you lived through a night like that, you didn't trust distance. Briggs was still there too, his face drawn, the edge of arrogance dulled by exhaustion. He tried to reclaim his old posture. It didn't fit the same way anymore. In the surgical wing, Mercer scrubbed in for a procedure that had been scheduled before the crash, the kind of case that didn't care about his personal timeline. His hands moved through the ritual of antiseptic and water, but his mind stayed in the ER. It stayed on that word restricted. It stayed on Maya's steady eyes. It stayed on the way she had said we bought them time like it was doctrine. The case went smoothly until it didn't. A complication that would have been minor on a good day became heavier under the weight of his divided attention. He adjusted. He corrected. He finished. As he peeled off his gloves, a nurse pushed into the scrub area with urgency she tried to keep professional. "Dr. Mercer," she said, "ICU is paging you. One of the crash patients is crashing." Mercer's chest tightened. Which one? "The penetrating trauma patient," she said. Blood pressure dropping. "They're calling it a code." Mercer moved before she finished speaking. By the time he reached ICU, the corridor was already filling. People moved fast, but there was a hesitancy in their speed, a fraction of uncertainty that mattered. A code cart waited outside the room. A nurse stood at the door with eyes too wide. Inside, the patient's monitor screamed. Tessa was there, hands on the bed, voice sharp. "Compress. Now." A resident was doing compressions, but his rhythm was off, too fast, too shallow. Briggs stood near the foot of the bed shouting orders that did not land clean. "Get pressors," he barked. "Call anesthesia. Call the OR." Someone answered. "They're on their way." It was too many voices and not enough certainty. Mercer pushed through. "Move," he said, and the word had the authority of a scalpel. Briggs turned relief flashing across his face before pride could hide it. He dropped 10 minutes ago. We stabilized, then lost him again. Mercer's eyes snapped to the monitor, to the line that had turned into the kind of flatness nobody wanted to see. He scanned the interventions. He scanned the IV lines. He scanned the dressing and saw seepage, slow and persistent. He saw a nurse trying to apply pressure, but her hands were slipping because she didn't know exactly where the force needed to go. Mercer felt anger flare, not at the nurse, at the absence. Maya would have known. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't have time for it. He stepped in, placed his own hands, adjusted pressure by a fraction of an inch, and felt the bleeding respond. He barked for ultrasound. He called for blood. He directed compressions. He took over because that was his job. They got a rhythm back. Small, ugly, real. The patient stabilized enough to keep going, but the cost had already been paid in minutes that should not have been lost. The room settled into the exhausted quiet that followed a crisis barely avoided. Tessa stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall, shoulders tense. Her eyes were bright with fury that had nowhere clean to go. Briggs followed, wiping sweat off his forehead with the back of his hand. "We did what we could," he said too quickly. Tessa's gaze cut to him. "We did what we could without the person you sent home." Briggs stiffened. She wasn't authorized. Tessa's voice dropped deadly calm. Authorized doesn't matter to a body bleeding out. Briggs opened his mouth, then shut it when Mercer stepped into the hallway. Mercer's eyes were hard. He didn't need a report. He had seen the lag, the hesitation, the way the room had moved slower without Maya's quiet certainty. Tessa spoke first because she couldn't hold it in. "We lost ground." Mercer nodded once. Tessa swallowed, then said the line that had been sitting in her throat like a stone. "We wouldn't have lost that much ground if she'd been here." Mercer didn't correct her. He didn't defend administration. He didn't mention liability or policy. He only looked down the corridor and felt his decision settle into place with the same clarity Maya used in the ER. He walked back to his office without waiting for anyone to follow. He shut the door. He sat at his desk. He stared at the phone. Then he picked it up and dialed a number he had memorized because he had seen it on the personnel sheet, because he had a habit of knowing where the people in his department lived inside the system. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Maya answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was flat, not sleepy. "Dr. Mercer." He held the phone close, lowering his voice like the walls might listen. "I know you're on leave." A pause. "Yes. I know there are protocols," he said. Another pause longer. "Yes." Mercer took a breath. He heard the faint sound of a kettle heating in the background, the small domestic noise that made the call feel surreal. "One of the crash patients coded again," Mercer said. Maya didn't speak. Mercer continued, voice tightening. "We stabilized him, barely. It took longer than it should have." Maya's silence sharpened. Not indifference, restraint. Mercer leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "There are people asking questions I don't have answers to. Federal investigators who won't explain what they want. Administration trying to bury the story. And meanwhile, patients keep coming in like the world doesn't care about our paperwork." Maya's breath came out slow. "I'm not cleared to work." "I know," Mercer said. "Technically, I'm not cleared to dig into your file either, and yet here we are." Maya's voice stayed level. "You shouldn't be calling me." Mercer's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have been needed. But you were." A pause stretched, filled with old instincts surfacing in the quiet between words. Maya spoke carefully. "If I walk back in, it becomes a different situation." Mercer didn't argue. He chose honesty. "It already is." Maya's voice was very quiet. "Who else knows you called?" "No one," Mercer said. Then after a beat, "Tessa knows we lost time." Maya didn't respond to that. Mercer pressed on because he had learned in the ER that hesitation was a luxury. "I need you to listen. Not to agree. Just to listen." He heard her shift, the small sound of a chair moving. Mercer continued. "People are going to keep dying while we wait for clarity. They don't get clarity. They get minutes. You understand minutes." Maya's voice softened barely. "You're asking me to break rules." Mercer's tone went steady. "I'm asking you to keep people alive." Silence. Then Maya said, "I can't wear the hospital's badge if they took it." Mercer swallowed. "We can figure that out?" Maya's voice returned to flat control. "That's not an answer." Mercer exhaled, feeling frustration claw at him. "Maya, if you were in the building tonight, that patient would have stabilized faster." Maya's silence held, and in it Mercer could hear the weight she carried, the weight Aaron Caldwell had hinted at without naming. Finally, Maya said, "If I come back, it won't be for cameras." Mercer's voice sharpened. "I don't want cameras. I want living patients." Maya inhaled one slow, "I'll think." Mercer wanted to push harder. He didn't. He had learned from her tonight that the best pressure was precise, not loud. He said, "If you decide no, I'll understand." Maya answered, "You won't." Mercer didn't deny it. "Stay reachable." Maya's voice stayed even. "I am." They hung up. Mercer sat in the dark office for a moment, staring at the phone like it might ring with permission. Instead, his computer chimed softly. A new email from administration. Mandatory record preservation order. No external comment. He stared at the words until they blurred. Then he stood, walked out, and headed toward the administrative wing like a man going into surgery without anesthesia. The next morning, a sealed manila envelope appeared on Harold Sloane's desk. No return address. no letterhead, no postmark that made sense. Harold's assistant brought it in with careful hands, as if it might bite. Harold stared at it, then looked at Celia Vance. Her composure had begun to crack at the edges. She opened it with a letter opener like she was cutting into a wound. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a time, coordinates, a name typed at the top that meant nothing to Harold and everything to Celia. At the bottom, a handwritten note in neat, careful script. Stand by. By noon, unmarked vehicles sat 2 blocks from Tidewater Regional. Not close enough to claim, not far enough to ignore. Engines idled. Men in plain clothes leaned against doors without looking like they were waiting. Inside the hospital, conversations died when those vehicles were noticed through the windows. Phones stayed in pockets. Eyes flicked away from security cameras as if cameras had suddenly become dangerous. Mercer saw them from the surgical floor and felt his stomach tighten. He didn't know who had sent them, but he knew what their presence meant. Someone was moving pieces now. Across town, Maya stood at her own window with the blinds half open, watching rain turn the street into a smear of gray. She had not turned on the television. She didn't need to. The world had a way of reaching you anyway. Her phone vibrated once against the table. Unknown number. A single word appeared on the screen. Now. Maya stared at it without blinking. Her hand moved to the bracelet on her wrist thumb, pressing the metal as if checking it was real. She picked up her jacket from the closet, the plain dark one, and slid her arms into it with the same calm she used when pulling on gloves in Trauma 1. Then she stepped toward the door. Maya stared at the word on her phone until it felt less like a message and more like an order she had heard before. She slid the device into her pocket, grabbed her keys, and checked the hallway through the peephole, out of habit, not fear. The corridor was empty. The building was quiet in that late afternoon way, neighbors moving behind closed doors, televisions murmuring through walls. She stepped out anyway, locking the door with a soft click that sounded too loud in the stillness. Outside, Norfolk had turned gray and slick. Rain drifted sideways, turning headlights into smeared stars on wet pavement. Maya kept her hood up and her posture loose, not relaxed, ready. She moved through the parking lot without hurrying the way you moved when you needed to arrive, steady, not breathless. When she reached the main road, she saw it, Tidewater Regional. In the distance, its glass front glowing warm against the cold weather, and 2 blocks away the unmarked vehicles idling like they owned the air. They were placed carefully, not in front of the hospital, not hidden either. A statement without words. Maya crossed the street with the light hands in her jacket pockets, eyes scanning. A man leaned against one of the SUVs with his arms folded, face blank. He didn't look at her like a stranger. He looked at her like he recognized the weight she carried. Another figure stood near him, a woman in a plain jacket with a military straightness to her spine. Erin Caldwell. Erin's gaze met Maya's for a second. No greeting, no smile, just a small nod, a confirmation that Maya had done what she was told. Maya didn't stop. She kept walking. The closer she got to the hospital, the more the noise found her. A faint, chanting echo of voices outside the ambulance bay. Reporters calling into cameras. Phones held up behind barriers. The media camped out like weather patient and relentless. Maya turned slightly, choosing the side entrance used by staff, the one with less light and fewer eyes. A security guard stood inside the vestibule, hand near his radio. He looked up sharply as she approached. His expression shifted. Confusion, then recognition, then the quiet relief of someone who had been given a private instruction. "Maya," he said. She waited. He glanced down the hallway as if checking for watchers. "They told me if you showed up, I was supposed to let you through." "Who is they?" Maya asked. The guard swallowed. "Someone above my pay." Maya nodded once. She didn't need a name. She needed a door. The guard swiped his badge and the inner door buzzed open. As Maya stepped into the staff corridor, the familiar smell wrapped around her. Antiseptic plastic and the faint metallic hint of oxygen. The building's pulse. The noise she had missed without admitting it. The hospital felt different now. Not louder, heavier, like the air pressure had changed. 2 nurses turned a corner and froze when they saw her. One's mouth opened and closed again, words trapped behind awe and uncertainty. The other nodded quickly, like acknowledging her was a small act of courage. Maya kept moving. She didn't offer comfort, she didn't accept it. She reached the ER doors and heard the alarm before she saw the patient. A trauma alert echoed down the corridor, the overhead speaker voice clipped and urgent. The sound drew staff like gravity. People moved with purpose that was sharpened by dread. Tessa Rowe spotted Maya near the nurse's station and stopped mid-step. For a heartbeat, Tessa's face did something rare. It softened. Then the professional mask snapped back in place. "You're not supposed to be here," Tessa said, voice low. Maya didn't look away. "I got a message." Tessa's eyes flicked toward the hallway where the unmarked vehicles were not visible but felt present. So did we. A gurney slammed through the doors, paramedics shouting, rain dripping off their sleeves. A young man, pale eyes half open, breathing shallow. The monitor screamed a rhythm that wasn't rhythm. "Blunt trauma," the lead medic said fast. "Possible internal bleed. Pressure dropping. We lost him once in the truck." A resident started reciting steps, voice tight. Anesthesia was paged. Surgery was paged. People reached for equipment that wasn't where it should be. Maya stepped into the space without announcing herself. Her hands found gloves. Her eyes found the patient's abdomen, the way it held tension, the subtle guarding that suggested pain deeper than skin. Mercer pushed through the crowd a second later, still in scrubs, hair damp as if he had washed his hands and his face and nothing else. He stopped when he saw Maya, the surprise hitting him like a physical blow. "You came," he said. Maya's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "I was in the neighborhood." Mercer didn't call out the lie. He accepted it as the kind of lie people told when the truth was heavier. The resident hesitated, caught between rules and the obvious fact that Maya's hands were already working. Ethan Briggs was there too, face-tight eyes flicking between Maya and Mercer like he didn't know which authority he feared more. Mercer's voice cut through the room. "Focus. Fast scan now. Blood ready. Prep OR." The ultrasound probe pressed into the patient's skin, and the image flickered on the screen like a storm cloud. Dark fluid where there shouldn't be dark fluid. The resident's voice cracked slightly. "Positive." Or Mercer snapped. Maya leaned closer to the patient's face, speaking low, steady. "Stay with me. Keep your eyes open." The patient tried to focus. His lips moved. No sound came. A nurse reached for a pressure cuff. It failed. Another alarm screamed. The patient's breathing became a wet rasp, as if his lungs were trying to fill with something they couldn't tolerate. Maya's hand moved to his chest, feeling the pattern, not just the number. "His left side is fading," she said to Mercer. Mercer's eyes sharpened. He didn't argue. He trusted her without admitting he trusted her. "Needle," he said. A resident froze for half a second. Maya reached past him and pulled the kit from the cart with a motion so practiced it looked like muscle memory. She handed it to Mercer without looking away from the patient. Mercer's hands were fast. The intervention was clean. Air hissed. The patient's chest rose easier by a fraction. They rolled him toward the operating room like they were pushing against time itself. As they moved, Maya caught sight of a man in a suit near the corridor. Not hospital administration. Not FBI posture, too controlled. He watched her like he was counting steps. Not mistakes. Maya's gaze met his for a second. He didn't react. He simply observed. Outside, the ER windows through rain-streaked glass headlights approached in slow formation. Black SUVs, not ambulances. One, then another, then 2 more, pulling into view with deliberate calm. The room noticed all at once. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones were lowered. Even the usual ER noise seemed to thin as if the building recognized a different kind of authority. The doors opened in coordinated sequence. Men stepped out wearing civilian jackets that didn't hide what they were. Their haircuts were too neat. Their movements too precise. Behind them came a uniform crisp, unmistakable. A Navy admiral's uniform. The brass caught the gray daylight and held it. The man in the suit exhaled once barely noticeable, like he had been waiting for the final piece to arrive. In the operating room, the patient crashed. The monitor's tone flattened into that single, horrible note that never sounded less terrible no matter how many times you heard it. Mercer's shoulders tightened. His eyes flicked to Maya over the mask, and the look held everything he could not say. He needed her. Maya didn't hesitate. She stepped to the sink and began scrubbing in movements economical water running over her hands, as if washing could remove the past along with bacteria. She felt the bracelet against her wrist and pushed it up higher so it wouldn't interfere. Mercer's voice stayed clipped. "We're losing him." Maya's voice stayed steady. "Then we stop losing time." They worked together without the choreography of long partnership, but with the clarity of two people who understood what mattered. Mercer's hands were surgical precise. Maya's were supportive anticipatory. When Mercer reached for suction, it was already there. When he needed clamps, they were placed into his palm without him looking. The bleeding was internal deep stubborn, the kind that turned minutes into a threat. Maya watched the patient's skin tone, the subtle shift in lips, the way the monitor lagged behind what the body was already confessing. "Pressure is about to drop," she said. Mercer didn't ask how she knew. He adjusted before the numbers fell. A nurse at the head of the bed called out a new rhythm change. A resident tried to speak and stuttered into silence. Maya's voice cut through calm corrective. "Focus on ventilation. Don't chase the monitor." The resident obeyed. The bleeding slowed, then stopped in the narrow sense that mattered. The patient's pressure climbed back from the edge. Mercer's breath shook slightly as he leaned back, eyes still locked on the field. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "You saved him." Maya's response came automatically. "We all did." Mercer turned his head toward her, eyes intense above his mask. "No," he said. "You did what kept him alive long enough for me to do my job." Maya held his gaze for a beat, then looked back to the patient. She didn't accept praise because praise was loud. Survival was quiet. When they stepped out of the operating room, the corridor had changed. Staff stood in clusters pretending to be busy. No one pulled out phones. No one spoke above a murmur. The air felt like it had been claimed. The Admiral stood in the hallway with Aaron Caldwell at his side, and two men behind them who held themselves like Marines even in civilian posture. Mercer's eyes widened slightly. He stopped, instinctively aware that he had walked into something beyond hospital politics. The Admiral's gaze moved to Maya first. "Petty Officer Kincaid," he said. The title hit the air like a weight dropped on tile. Some staff didn't understand what it meant. The ones who did felt their throats tighten. Maya's face didn't change. Only her eyes narrowed slightly. "Sir?" The Admiral stepped closer. Not aggressive, simply present. His face was lined with age and responsibility. His eyes were sharp, the eyes of a man who had watched people try to hide truths and fail. "You were given orders to disappear," he said. Maya's voice stayed even. "I followed them. And yet you are here," the Admiral replied. "Saving lives, drawing attention." Maya didn't argue. People were dying. The Admiral glanced toward the Mercer, then to Harold Sloan and Celia Vance, who had arrived looking pale and uncertain, pulled by rumor and fear. Harold cleared his throat. "Admiral, this is a civilian facility. We." The Admiral raised a hand, not loud, not dramatic, and Harold's voice died. The Admiral spoke to the director, as if speaking to someone who needed reality translated into simple terms. "This nurse prevented multiple fatalities during a critical staffing shortage," he said. "Is that assessment accurate?" Harold swallowed. "Yes, sir. And she accomplished this using specialized skills acquired while serving under federal authority in combat zones." The Admiral continued. Celia Vance tried to regain footing. "With respect, Admiral, we have liability exposure and media coverage, and—" The Admiral turned his head slightly toward her. His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "The media will be handled," he said, "by people who understand how narratives are managed." Celia's mouth tightened. She had spent her career controlling narratives. She knew what it sounded like when someone else owned the room. The Admiral looked back at Maya. "We are not here to arrest you." Maya's jaw tightened. "Then why are you here?" The Admiral's expression shifted, the closest thing to regret that a man like him would allow. "We are here to correct an administrative decision," he said. "One that was made because your file was politically inconvenient. What you learned, what you became capable of doing under extreme conditions, it couldn't be explained to people who prefer clean stories." Maya didn't blink. "So you buried me." Aaron Caldwell's gaze dropped for half a second, shame flickering. The Admiral continued, "Your restricted status was meant to protect you and protect others. It also became a weapon used to silence you." Maya's voice was quiet. "It worked." The Admiral nodded slightly. "Until last night." He turned to one of the men behind him. The man stepped forward and handed the Admiral a sealed folder. The Admiral didn't open it. He held it like it was both paper and power. "We are reopening your file under specific conditions," the Admiral said. "Full operational discretion. No media exposure, no public recognition. Civilian employment remains intact." Harold found his voice. "We placed her on leave because there was a federal inquiry and we needed clarity." The Admiral's eyes moved to Harold. "You placed her on leave because you were afraid." Harold's face flushed. "We were protecting the hospital." The Admiral's voice stayed level. "You were protecting yourselves." Celia tried again, voice careful. "If she returns to direct patient care, our board will demand to know her credentials, her scope, her authorization." The Admiral's gaze held hers. "Her credentials are sufficient. Her scope will be defined privately. Her authorization will not be debated in public." Celia's lips pressed together. "This sets a precedent." The Admiral didn't flinch. "So did the night you nearly lost 5 patients because you were short-staffed and waiting for permission." Silence spread down the corridor like a slow tide. Then the 2 men behind the Admiral stepped forward. Their movements were synchronized, practiced. They stopped in front of Maya and raised their hands in a formal salute, sharp and complete. Hospital staff froze. For a fractured moment, the corridor was no longer a hospital hallway. It was a memory Maya hadn't invited in. Heat, dust, metal. Voices shouting in a language that was half commands and half prayers. Maya's throat tightened. Her eyes stayed steady. She didn't return the salute. She simply nodded once, accepting the respect without performing it. The men dropped their hands and stepped back. The Admiral leaned closer to Maya, lowering his voice so only she and Mercer could hear. "You don't owe us anything," he said. "But we owe you clarity. You can continue working here under civilian authority, with protections in place, or you can return to federal service quietly and teach what you know to people who will need it." Maya's gaze moved past him, taking in the nurses watching her with something like pride. The residents watching her hands with something like hunger. The patients behind closed doors still alive because she had refused to wait. Mercer stood beside her, eyes fixed on her face, not asking, not pleading, simply present. Maya's voice was soft but firm. "I'll stay." The Admiral's expression shifted into something almost like approval. "I thought you might." He straightened and addressed Harold and Celia again. "This is how this will work," he said. Nurse Kincaid returns to duty effective immediately. Her personnel record will reflect what it needs to reflect. Any inquiry that requires coordination will go through my office. Any media requests will be denied. Any attempt to turn this into a public spectacle will be shut down. Harold swallowed again, understood. Celia forced her voice to remain smooth. "And the FBI." Aaron Caldwell answered this time. "They will be redirected." Celia's eyes narrowed. Redirected to where? Aaron's gaze stayed calm, away. The Admiral turned to Mercer. "Dr. Mercer," he said. Mercer's posture straightened out of instinct. "Sir." "You have a surgeon's habit of digging," the Admiral said. Mercer didn't deny it. 5 people are alive because of her. The Admiral nodded once. "Then you understand why she cannot become a headline." Mercer's jaw tightened. I understand why she shouldn't have been punished. The Admiral's eyes held his. Keep her in the work, keep her out of the story. Mercer nodded slow. Yes, sir. The Admiral handed the sealed folder to Harold without ceremony. Your administrative mistake is corrected, he said. Harold held the folder like it was heavier than paper. Outside, the black SUVs idled for another moment, then pulled away, without sirens, without spectacle, leaving only rain and the hospital's ordinary noises trying to reclaim the space. The next morning, the news coverage shifted. No more mystery nurse. No more whispers of federal involvement. The headline read like every other hospital story that got smoothed down before it reached the public. Hospital staff saves multiple lives during overnight crisis. Maya's name appeared once buried deep, easy to miss, unless you already knew to look. Inside Tidewater Regional, everything felt different anyway. When Maya walked into the ER, no one told her to stay back. Residents didn't bark rules at her like shields. They watched her hands and tried to learn the thinking behind them. Ethan Briggs stood near the charge desk and looked like he had slept for 10 minutes and regretted all of them. He approached Maya carefully, pride stripped down to something more honest. I was wrong, he said. Maya didn't look up from checking a supply tray. About what? Briggs swallowed. About you, about waiting, about thinking the rules were the medicine. Maya finally met his eyes. She didn't gloat. She didn't soften. Rules are tools, she said, not life support. Briggs nodded slowly. Can you show me what you saw in that second patient? The one who looked fine. Maya studied him for a beat, deciding whether he was asking to learn or asking to be forgiven. Then she spoke practical, simple. Watch the ribs. Watch the neck. Watch what the body is trying to hide. The monitor tells you what already happened. Briggs nodded again, absorbing it like a lesson he should have learned years ago. Tessa Rowe watched from a distance, arms folded, expression unreadable. When Maya passed her, Tessa spoke quietly. I didn't thank you, Tessa said. Maya paused. You kept the room moving. Tessa's eyes held hers. You kept the room from freezing. Maya's hand lifted briefly to the bracelet thumb, pressing the metal, then dropped. We bought time. Tessa exhaled. Yeah, she said. We did. Mercer changed too in the way people changed when they saw something they couldn't unsee. He didn't turn Maya into a legend. He didn't ask her to explain her past. He understood now that asking would be selfish, like demanding a wound be uncovered for curiosity. Instead, he did what surgeons did. He adjusted systems. He updated protocols quietly, not through committees that took months, but through practice, through the way he spoke to residents during trauma, through the way he supported nurses when they made early calls that saved minutes. He created space for decisive action without turning it into a public conflict. One night a week, when the ER settled into that uneasy lull between surges, Mercer would find Maya at a counter restocking supplies that didn't need restocking hands moving because stillness was too loud. He would stand beside her and wash his hands at the sink, the two of them sharing silence like it was a language. Once he said, "You were right about time." Maya didn't look up. "It's all we ever have." Mercer's voice stayed quiet. "The body decides the rest." Maya's hands paused for a fraction, then resumed. "That's not how they teach it here." Mercer's mouth tightened slightly. "No," he said, "they teach control." Maya's gaze flicked to him. "Control is a story we tell ourselves." Mercer didn't argue. He had seen enough blood to know she was right. Weeks passed. The media moved on, hungry for new tragedy. The unmarked vehicles stopped appearing. The FBI never came back to the ER. The hospital's statement remained the official truth, clean and incomplete. Inside the building, the real truth lived in the way the staff moved. New nurses sought Maya out with questions they were afraid to ask in front of others. How do you stay calm when the room is screaming? How do you decide when you don't have permission? How do you keep your hand steady? Maya never gave speeches. She showed them. She corrected their grip on a bag valve mask. She adjusted their posture during compressions. She taught them to count breaths with their eyes and not trust a number just because it blinked confidently. She taught quietly the way she had always taught because the lessons that mattered most didn't need volume. Sometimes, late at night after a difficult case, Mercer would catch staff looking at Maya like she was something unreal. He would clear his throat and redirect them. "She's a nurse," he would say. "Work." It wasn't dismissal, it was protection. And Maya accepted it because she didn't want to be worshipped. She wanted the next hands to be steadier than hers had been when she learned the hard way. On a cold night months later, the ER was finally quiet enough to feel like a pause instead of a threat. Maya stood in the break room by the window watching traffic move through Norfolk below, red taillights streaming like blood through veins. Rain had returned, tapping against the glass, a familiar sound. Behind her, the room held the low hum of a vending machine and the soft murmur of nurses swapping stories that weren't really jokes. Maya touched the silver bracelet on her wrist, not as a charm, not as a memorial, as an anchor. Mercer stepped into the break room and stopped near the door. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hospital breathed around them. Finally, Mercer said, "You ever regret coming back?" Maya watched the cars below for another beat before answering. "I regret the people I couldn't buy time for," she said. Mercer's throat tightened. He nodded once, accepting the truth without trying to fix it. Maya's gaze stayed on the traffic. Her voice softened almost to herself. "Here, at least minutes mean something." Mercer moved closer, stood beside her at the window, and looked out at the city that never stopped rushing, never stopped colliding, never stopped needing someone to hold the line when permission was too slow. Neither of them reached for comfort. Neither of them needed it. Outside, headlights slid through rain, and inside the monitors continued their soft, vigilant songs, counting out the only resource that ever mattered.